Supermarket price hikes making it harder for the president to reassure Americans, less than half now, saying that they're happy with the impact President Trump is making on the economy. Doug Flynn, Zito Capital Management, with more on this right now. I actually think the big picture thing here, Doug, with this is it shows you how tricky inflation is as in not only economic, but political issue, right? Because think about what inflation is. It's rising prices, literally. So, so you say to someone, are you worried about the prices? They're going to look and say, well, they're higher than last year, even if it's even if the rate is not as high. So this is a tough one. But what do you make of groceries?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that definitely impacts the working class more than most other things, and so they feel it the most. And I think that has a lot to do with the negative consumer sentiment that you see. But realistically, even though inflation, food inflation is up around 3-ish% year over year, it's a little bit more than the general inflation rate, but not much. The problem is that it comes on top of 27% inflation for the previous 4 years. So, you know, that averages to a much higher annual increase in food inflation. But when you add it together, the last 5 years, food is up over 30%, and most people, net of taxes with their paychecks, haven't seen a 30% plus increase in their pay. So they feel it, and so it's weighing on them in a number of ways.
Yeah, it makes sense. And again, the opposite, economically at least, is not something you root for. That would be deflation, which is worse usually for an economy when prices go down, harder to handle, right?
Yeah. The problem is that the president came in and said, on day one, I'm going to lower grocery prices.
Correct.
And I said, except for eggs, maybe that's really the only thing you're going to be able to do. That's not really the goal, but he touted that, and so people are hanging him on that. And realistically, all you want is a slower rate of increase. It's very hard to get prices to go negative, and a lot of ways, as you said, is a negative for other reasons.
No, I agree with you. That is true. I mean, he said, they're hitting me with eggs. That's what he said when they came in. Okay, let me ask you about what we do about this. Bigger picture, because when prices for items were higher at the local towns, here comes Amazon undercutting everyone on prices. Yeah. Well, guess what? Here comes Amazon. Amazon has a new private label grocery line that it's launching with Amazon Grocery. We're simplifying how customers discover and shop our extensive private label food selection while maintaining the quality and the value our customers expect and deserve. That's one of their VPs saying as much. Okay, Amazon to the rescue here. What do you make of this from Amazon?
Well, they've tried different things in the grocery area, and they do want just the volume and the pure numbers, but they're starting with about 1,000 items, apparently about $5 or so or less, and it's aimed at price-conscious consumers, which, as we were just saying, people are definitely feeling and they're looking for. And they're trying to do private label, good quality, inexpensive versions. And this is what happens. Amazon sort of uses everybody initially, and then they start to compete with you, and then suddenly you might start getting squeezed as a company. And actually, you could see that in the stocks of the publicly traded firms, the supermarket chains. They actually were negative on this announcement because now you've got a major competitor coming in, and they tend, once they figure this out, they could do some damage to their businesses. And so they'll start with these low items and just a few, and then they expand from there. Is typically how it goes once they figure it out.
Okay, let's end on this. Profit at Elon Musk's company, Tesla, and third-quarter deliveries in particular. It's a tax break, by the way, that affects Tesla coming to an end. How do you see this company that's been through so much, I guess, and gets a lot of attention because of who its CEO is as a business right now?
Yeah. So you have to almost discount the big rush before September 30th, this Q3 numbers. In fact, Ford, as an example, their EV sales went up 30%. They sold 30,000 units. That's a record for them. And so, that's all U.S. based. So I look at Tesla and say, how did they do in Europe? And in Europe, they are still struggling. They didn't have that incentive, so it's just pure competition and, from China and the other areas. And so they do have a hard time replicating this next quarter. And look, the stock is up, 40% in the last quarter in anticipation of all this. And so now I just get a little nervous with whether or not they're going to be able to repeat this. Even though the numbers look pretty good relative to last year, slightly down, I just don't see them repeating it without the EV incentive. And even in Europe, he obviously has some issues with his reputation and whatnot. So that's where I would look in terms of what is more likely going to happen longer term. But Tesla, remember, isn't just cars. They do a lot of other stuff, and so if they can get that going, that could replace some of the losses per se on the auto business.
Yeah, and get a robot. You should get a robot, Doug. All right, thank you, Doug. We got to run here. Closing bell time.